Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from or if you are watching the replay. This is The Awesome Journey, and I am your host, Kelly Steinica, along with my co-host in care, Christy Howard. And we are just two girls that met on LinkedIn 15 years ago, live on opposite sides of the country, have giving hearts, a passion for paying it forward. And I was praying to live louder in my purpose. And so now here we sit with microphones bringing you the awesome journey. And one of our goals when we were putting this all together was to highlight incredible individuals to share their stories and struggles, because truly we are united in our personal journeys. And with that goal in mind, I am saying, not so humbly, we crushed it this week with our guest, Mr. Clint Hatton of Big Bold Brave, and author of the book by the same title. Any of you who are Heart High alumni or know either one of us from high school, the nerdy freshman in me is geeking out like nobody's business, and so excited to be sitting here with Clint, and the adult, more mature version of me truly is doing the same thing. So and we have so serendipitously reconnected through LinkedIn, literally less than 6 weeks ago. So it is just such a privilege and an honor, and we're so excited to have you with us today. And before we dive right in, because we want to have as much time with Clint as possible, I will turn it over to my co-host in care, Christy Howard.
Hello. Yes, Mercury is still in retrograde.
Yes.
I think it ends on Sunday, the day I fly out of the United States. But all will be good, and we figured this out. And hopefully you all have gotten the blast that I just blew up of our new link, because you know us, we're still trying to figure out this back end. And as women, we do tend to juggle and sometimes not seeing what we're juggling. And we went live before we were supposed to go live. Anyway, I'm excited to have Clint on here. What was interesting, I was talking to Kelly one night, we were chatting, and I'm like, oh, we should talk to this Clint Hatton. I don't know who he is, but he seems like he's got a cool profile, because, you know, I look at profiles. And she's like, oh my gosh, I went to high school with him. And I'm like, oh, okay, then you get to talk to him and just bring him on. So, Clint, we're blessed to have you here, and your story has so many dynamics that hit so many people.
Yes.
Of the fear, the struggles, getting over it, not really getting over it, but getting through it, because that's what we do. We get through it. So it's all yours, dude. It's all yours. So welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kelly and Christy. I tell you, we've been pumping this thing up for several days, and I just kept getting more and more and more excited. So hopefully I won't jump through the screen, but we're gonna start rolling here. But I'm just really grateful. I'm just really grateful to be a part of this. You know, I think what you guys are doing is amazing, and so to have the chance to just be a small part of it today is truly an honor. So, you know, thank you for that. You know, Kelly, it's funny when, well, first of all, thank you for the compliment of there was a freshman girl who maybe thought, you know, something of me. I wish I could go back now and feel the way that would have felt if I'd have known. but we'll stay in the present. We'll stay in the present.
Yes.
You know, I think, you know, guys, for this, you know, talk we're going to have today, I want to back up just a little bit and give just a little bit of my, I guess, if you want to call it Genesis story, because I do think, one, life is a journey. You know, I think we could agree on that. You know, sometimes we talk about destiny and destination, and I think that's fine. But to me, life is a journey because it never stops, right? There is no destination. You know, as you said, Christy, we're just constantly moving forward. And sometimes that's through really tough stuff. And sometimes that's great celebrations and amazing experiences. And I've had both, you know. But before we get into, you know, my current story in the book, I want to go back to, I was born and raised in Southern California. And I always like to say sunny Southern California because I loved living there.
Yes.
And for me, things were, you know, what I consider to be pretty normal up until I was about 11 years old. And I say that, you know, understanding that there was some fighting that went on between my parents. But, you know, at that age, it's just what you grow up with. You don't know it's any different than anybody else's house. So I didn't think much about it. And my parents had me very late. My mom actually had a partial hysterectomy 8 years before I was born. had a bunch of her stuff removed and really wasn't supposed to have another child. So I was the big surprise. Here I come. And so I say that because by the time I was 11, they'd already been married over 25 years. And so what ended up happening next was pretty shocking. My dad had an affair. And, like anybody that's ever experienced anything like that, it's pretty crushing. But for my mom, they got married at 18 and 16. They're from the Korean War generation. So very young. And so, he was the only man my mom knew. And my brother, who was almost 8 years older, had already moved away. He lived several hundred miles away. So my dad moved out to go live with this girlfriend and her son, who was 2 years older than me. And I was left, to try and take care of my mom, who was not coping well. She started drinking really heavy, ended up eventually suffering from suicidal ideation. And, I don't want to get in the weeds with this story because I could go on about that part of my life, but a couple of occasions, she almost killed me in the process. One time we were in a speeding car on a road called Placerita Canyon Road, which Kelly may remember it, but there's a lot of people who, died on that road because it was very narrow. And we spun out at about 65 miles an hour and she was drunk, driving us back from a restaurant because she was yelling she was going to end it. And something kept us on the road. I believe it was God, but anyway, it wasn't a Christian back then. We'll get to that. But anyway, and then there was another incident with a gun. And so it was just a really rough season and patch of my life between 11 and 12 for a brief period of time. And I do mean brief, like 2.5 months. We left Southern California and moved to out in the middle of nowhere, Podunk, Montana. I mean, like the middle of nowhere. The cool part was we had 20 acres and we had a river that ran right through it called the Bitterroot. So for the summer, I was fishing. I had a gun. I could shoot. At 12, it was pretty cool. And they had reconciled temporarily. He had moved out from his girlfriend, moved back in with us. But then what really got crazy is my dad was supposed to go to work. He was going to commute and be gone during the week and then come back. And instead he got on a plane and flew back to LA, got back with the girlfriend again. And literally we didn't know until a day or two later. And so craziness. My mom sold everything in 24 hours. No exaggeration. We were back on a plane within about 48 hours. And then life really became crazy. And so, ultimately my parents reconciled for good about a year later. So it was about a 2-year process. God rest their souls. They both passed away within about 6 months of each other about 8 years ago. They were married over 65 years. And we had a good relationship as I became an adult and later on. But what that experience did to me is it really caused me to start using really poor coping mechanisms. I started drinking pretty heavy and doing drugs at only 13 years old. And for me, I like to say I was a successful athlete at the levels I played at. I wasn't a professional. I don't want to over exaggerate, but at the levels that I played at, I was successful. I usually won all-star, I was in all-star games and all league and different things like that. And that was the one thing that kind of kept me. And when I use the word centered, I'm using that judiciously, but it was the one thing that kept me from going completely off the deep end. But then years later, I was in junior college, playing junior college football, hoping to get a full scholarship. And I had my second catastrophic knee injury, and that ended any hopes I had of continuing to compete. And, sadly, that was the one thing that really brought me life. So I ended up getting in the car business at 21 years old. And that's where I was actually introduced to meth. And so the next basically 9 years of my life was just this seesaw, roller coaster, up and down, up and down. 9 years basically of not every day, but abusing meth quite a bit. It wasn't uncommon we had crazy schedules where once a month we get off on Thursday afternoon and not have to be back until Monday morning. It was not uncommon for us to just start doing meth on Thursday night and not even go to sleep until Sunday night. Just a crazy, crazy lifestyle. And finally I ended up in a marriage, which that's a miracle, right? You're like, wow, how did that happen, right?
Boy, she looked out.
Yeah. So far, I've given you no evidence that I had any business being a husband, and you would be right. But my ex-wife, she was broken too. We were two broken people who found each other, And so to fast forward through that, and we'll get to the present day. lasted about 5 years. And about a year before we ended up divorcing, we did meth together one last time. And guys, I don't know how to explain it. I know, Christy, you mentioned that you had somewhat of a background too. I don't know exactly what that looked like just yet, but it's not like you woke up from meth feeling good, right? I mean, I always felt like crap waking up from meth, but this was just different. That day I woke up, I was 30 years old and I was fed up and I was just sick of that being a part of my life. I suppose I had some shame, some embarrassment. I was sick of just wasting all the time that anybody who's ever lived this kind of lifestyle knows. Sometimes you'll spend hours just waiting in a car or waiting at home, waiting to get the stuff, just all the madness that goes with that lifestyle. And I told myself I was done. Like literally, I just quit cold turkey. I said, I'm done.
Wow.
I'm never doing it again. And I never looked back. Now, I continued drinking and some other things. So it wasn't like I was a choir boy. But ultimately, where that all led me is, so I've had this crazy lifestyle, terrible coping mechanisms. Now I'm divorced, which is a massive embarrassment. And just before that happened, I wandered into a church in Redding, California, mainly because I was in a network marketing company and I had some upline that were very successful and they invited me to go to church. And I went one day. And that's when I actually ended up deciding that I was going to give God a chance. Like, I've jacked this up pretty well. So let's just see what happens, if I include faith into my life. And so that was actually at 31 years old is when I actually gave my life over to God. And that's when things began to really shift.
Mine was 42.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yep.
Yes.
That's amazing. Yeah. What I love about that is we break the statistics.
Yeah.
Because to fast forward, I became a pastor. I was a pastor for 17 years. A big number of those years, I was a youth and young adult pastor. And the statistics out there is if you don't make a decision by 19, you're done.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're proof that
Yes.
that's not necessarily
Not true.
the case, right? Yeah, not true. Can't.
No.
So anyway, but I moved to Dallas, and that's where things kind of began to shift.
I mean, just incredible. And when Clint and I were talking, and when I talk about, that we grew up in the same hometown, our hometown at the time, which now is a massive freaking city, it was very small town. Everybody knew everybody. And I was saying, I'm like, I don't remember anyone, ever being divorced, separated. Like I remember, two people that had single moms that stand out, but everybody was married. And, the world has changed just so much. And really just to touch back on Clint and I, he played football with my older brother. So I was just the younger geeky sister at the time. And he was always friendly with me. It wasn't like he was ever rude or mean or anything like that, but we just did not interact, I would have remembered if you were. And, here we go off our separate ways in life and reconnect on LinkedIn 6 weeks ago, I think. It hasn't not been that long.
Right.
And truly after the conversation, because I was digging in and watching podcasts because I was so just drawn by his story and was just like, wow, I had no idea. And exactly like you said, 'cause you were a star athlete and, you have a vision in your own mind of what that person's life is like because you're a star athlete. You have it all together. Your life is amazing. And it's fascinating to know how many people, what is actually behind all of that. And I generally say and see and have seen, some of the most giving people that I've run into or share are the people that have gone through some of the most horrendous life events. And, another thing to celebrate with you is to say that you quit meth cold turkey. I mean, that's a major feat. And, to be able to say, I'm giving it to God, maybe not really knowing even the power that had at the time of what that was going to do to transition your life is, amazing. And, Christy, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that part too.
Well, first of all, we've got some thank you people for seeing my link.
Yes.
So hopefully other people will see it, but I want to acknowledge our audience.
Yes.
So we've got Andrea. There you go. Earth Angels. Absolutely. Omar, thank you. We've got Derek.
Come on.
Yes.
And we give Don all the credit for us being here.
Yes.
Eventually, we'll figure it all the back end at the end. Ambabola.
Hey.
I've got, this is Lizzie, because I can see who it is. Ash. Okay, and your boy, your brother, your friend, Bill. There you go.
Yes. Woo,
And just quickly, we've got Kim Harvey from the UK.
Yes.
And then just quickly, you know, God is awesome. We know this.
Yeah.
And there you go. But Kim, it's big, bold, brave.
Yes, and we will be sure
I'll
to
post that.
share, we'll share the links in the chat and the reposts. And I am telling you, and I did say this to Clint before we went live, is I don't say what I don't mean. And I honestly had intended to skim through Big Bold Brave before this so I could speak to it intelligently enough. And I think my brother just shared the link.
Yeah.
And I found myself, I sat down and I started reading, and then it was an hour later, and because I was so drawn into the story. And Clint, for your first book and the way that you wrote it, and I know that that's how I'm going blank on the guy that did the forward.
Oh, Howard B. Hart.
Yes.
Starbucks guy.
And about writing to the one person, because your goal was like, if I change the life of just one person, job done, you know, which is 100% Christy and I, how we roll. If we can help one person every day, I mean, job done. And it did feel like you were having a conversation with you, like you were taken into the story. And I mean, I sobbed, but 2 pages later, I was laughing. And, you know, and then each chapter has a reflection in it that is a self exercise that you go through that goes along with that portion of the book.
You're giving the book away, Kelly.
Well,
You're giving the book away. You're giving the book away.
Because it helps you learn something from it of yourself. So it's not just a book about someone's story. It is a story that will help you grow yourself. And just I marked mine up just a little bit for things to go back to and go to. But phenomenal book. I recommend it to absolutely everyone. It is just, I mean, so good. And what a gift for you to be able to be so vulnerable and raw to share your story and your journey to Big Bold Brave.
And so with that, let's share your story. We needed some back end of who you were as a child, but let's go dig into this.
Yeah.
The Big Bold Brave.
Yeah,
Let's get to the old man. Here we go.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's all yours now.
You know, and as I share my story too, I'm first of all, I'm grateful for those kind words, Kelly. Thank you so much. And, you know, it was my goal to make it as if it was written to one person. And unfortunately, I've heard that a lot. So I'm very proud of that part of it. But I'm also glad you brought, you know, one of the things that concerned me about marketing the book was I was a little concerned that people would assume because of our story that it was a grieving book. And even though it does cover how we handled tragedy, it's far more than a grieving book. It's really a book about living in life and overcoming fear. So just to catch everybody up, you know, so I met my bride. We celebrated 20 years here just a couple weeks ago. And during that time, you know, we have 3 boys. Living life, you know, and there was gut punches along the way. You know, I know Christy, we talked about that a second ago, that life is this journey and you know, there's ups and downs, there's celebrations, there's things to be excited about. And my life has certainly been that way. I don't look at the things we've been through and go, oh my gosh, what a rough life I've had. We just don't see it that way. Yeah. But there were, you know, we had a couple of babies prematurely. Our youngest, Liam, was born 3 months early at 1 pound, 14 ounces. He's now 13 and killing it. He's a black belt. He's just a total stud. But, you know, it was a very scary time. So, you know, as a family over the years, we've went through some tough times, but nothing that would compare to what we went through 3 years ago, or a little over 3 years ago. And so my oldest son, Gabriel, he was very, very passionate about life, often in a very good way and sometimes in an annoying way. He was very intense at times. You know, when he was young, he was the type that could throw just this massive temper tantrum, you know, and you'd be like, oh my God, and let him roll around the floor and scream and all that stuff. But he was always like super passionate about life and adventure. And at about 8 years old, he went up in a small aircraft with his uncle Danny and got the bug to be a pilot and never let it go. And so by the time he was a freshman in high school, I think it's important to point this out. You know, by now, you know, I've been a believer for a long period of time. I'd been a pastor for almost 15 years by the time Gabriel was in high school. And God really opened up the doors for him to be able to pursue his passion for aviation. You know, we were pastors and, you know, frankly, we weren't making any kind of money that would afford us the privilege of being able to pay for his aviation training. And yet God opened up doors through two different things. One was our school system here. Our high school has a 4-year educational aviation program, which is very rare. And so that was awesome. And then he joined a club called Tango 31 Aero Club. And that was founded by a gentleman who wanted to teach teenagers, you had to be a teenager, all about aviation, maintenance, building motors, you know, painting rusted out bodies, and then eventually flying. And so he got this opportunity by 16 years old. He soloed before he even had a driver's license. So I'll let all the moms and dads let that sink in for a second. And I want to point something out as we tell this part of the story, because, you know, I've been asked now, especially in retrospect, you know, did you ever have fear? And the answer is, of course, absolutely. You know, I'll never forget the day he soloed. You know, my wife, her name is Amaryllis. We both went there, of course, because we didn't want to miss it. And we're standing there, and what happens first is he goes up with the instructor. So they're flying around. They come back down, and the instructor gets out, shuts the door, and boom, Gabriel takes off. And at first, a lot like, you know, watching sports or whatever, very exhilarating. Yeah. There's this excitement in the air. He starts getting up into the sky, and I'm like, wow, this is incredible. You know, I'm so proud of him. Then he starts to circle, and the obvious thought hit me, oh, crap. He's got to come down now. He's got to land this thing. And so, you know, fear most definitely hit, you know, and I was very nervous and anxious. And then when he came down that very first time, it was pretty cool because he seemed to be a natural. He landed it really smoothly. He would have said like butter, and, you know, everybody's like, wow, that was awesome. And then he just did that several times. And I just think about, you know, here's this 16-year-old kid who also has fear. There's no doubt that when the instructor shut the door and he started taking off, there had to have been fear. Yeah. But he never let it stop him. And he went up anyway. And he kept going up, and he kept pursuing his dream. And so, you know, we watched him continue to train and just excel. And, you know, everybody that was around him was really impressed with his skill level and his passion and his intensity about flying. And then about 7 months later, he was on just an everyday trip, you guys. You know, he had flown to the University of Arkansas a few different times before because he had a lot of friends that attended university there. And, you know, when you're a young pilot, and I don't mean age, I mean new pilot, it's all about getting hours. So every excuse he had to fly, he was flying. And so he had a friend who needed to get back to school. He flew her back there, landed safely, said hello to a bunch of his friends, jumped back in the cockpit. And about 20 minutes later on his return trip, he ran into some unexpected weather in a mountainous region just outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas. And he suffered from what they call spatial disorientation. A lot of your listeners actually do know what that is, even if they don't know the term. Same thing that happened to the Kobe Bryant helicopter pilot. You think you're going up, you're going down. And he flew into a mountainside and he lost his life. And so, you know, all of those dreams that he had and all of those dreams that we had for his life, and just knowing what was in him. You know, he taught himself how to play guitar. He was an incredible photographer, that actually had some amazing opportunities with that as well. And I'm so grateful today. I have hundreds, if not thousands, of his photos. And, he attacked life. He never let fear get in the way. And he was living his dream. And unfortunately for us, his dream for us ended just shy of his 18th birthday. And so, as you guys can imagine, is a devastating blow. And so, you find yourself trying to process this. We were up the whole night, basically. We knew he disappeared from the radar about 8 p.m. And I won't take you guys for the sake of time and just, again, not get in the weeds with the story. But several hours throughout the night, Kelly, I know you read the book, so you're familiar with that part of the story. It was hellish. There was a lot of misinformation. We were being told that they didn't even know what had happened to him yet. And yet on my phone, I'm looking at news stories that suddenly they know it was a single person in a plane. And then later on at about 1 p.m., they're reporting a fatality. And then I call the sheriff's department and they're saying, we cannot confirm that, So it was a very long night, but about 3:30 in the morning is when we got the final word from the coroner and that's what they were waiting on. Everybody knew. They found him at 11 p.m. They knew he was dead, but they let us hang until 3:30 because they have a policy with, the coroner stamping off on what was the obvious to everybody on site. And so, a few hours later, my two other sons who were 9 and 14 at that time, we had let them sleep in. We didn't want them to go through what we were going through. And I was faced with telling him what I call the impossible conversation. And so we sat on the couch together and I looked at them and I gave them the news. Guys, I can't remember honestly what I said to them in terms of how I told them about Gabriel's death. I just remember the horror of their screams.
So Clint,
and their tears.
I'm trying not to cry.
It doesn't always.
No, because this is where we have those questions. Why him?
Yeah.
Why? So
Right.
because again, we only have explain to us how his way of living has made you go forward through tragedy. I mean, when we hit things, and Kelly shared her stories, I've shared some of mine. We have to figure out, and again, many of us that have gone through stuff that we didn't have that faith. We didn't have that strong faith at the time. But to understand how we go through it and see that such a terrible, terrible negative hits your life, where you can turn around and say, something, I don't know if I believe in coincidences. I don't know if I believe things happen for a reason, blah, blah, blah. But I went through this and I look at how life has just transpired because of this. That's just more fabulous.
Yeah, and one of the things that definitely, there's so many things that stand out to me, but one is the power of turning pain into purpose and how you live that. And there's so many different parts in the book, and it's not because I know you, because I don't really. It's fascinating that we've truly known each other for more years than I'm going to admit who each other are. But a 2-hour conversation of us having together that was so raw, open, authentic. Like, I feel like I've known Clint forever, and reading your story, of course, touched me in such a deep way. But being able to, the way that you describe some of the things of turning the pain into a purpose and battling fear with your love, like the part where you're describing how you truly are out loud battling fear. It's life changing. Because even for me, because I'm someone like that, we all three of us have definitely been through some tragedies in our lives, and coming out on the other side, and how we do turn that into purpose. So I think that is such a an important message and how Big, Bold, Brave came to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the important thing to recognize, I want to be so sensitive because, there's people listening right now that have been through similar circumstances or people who will listen to this later. And so, I want to be clear about one thing. I had no advantage with the pain. Nothing ever prepares you as a parent for the pain of losing a child. So we can just settle that.
Mhm.
Where I did have an advantage, though, is being a pastor for 15 years at that point. I'd walked a lot of people through really difficult times. I've been in hospital rooms watching someone else's loved one pass away right before our eyes, and then the fallout of that. How some people have, not necessarily had great coping mechanisms over the course of time. In some cases, being crippled for 20, 30, 40 years, stuck in the pain of that tragedy. Marriages, especially with a child, unfortunately, all too often, those marriages implode. And so, even though it was a tragedy and it was shocking, I was aware of those things. And so that morning when we brought the boys out, I sat them down, and after we gave them the news and, we all kind of processed the initial emotion of that, I told them, listen, we have two choices, and we can choose to focus on his death, meaning the tragedy of it, and constantly be caught in the pain of what we didn't have with him and all the things we're going to miss and all the things that go with what I just characterized as a death mentality. I said, or we can choose to live the way he lived. And, they obviously, the boys looked up to their big brother. I mean, he was this great adventurer. And so I just said, he attacked life, and that's what we're going to do too. And what I said specifically was, I said, really the only way we can honor the way he lived is to do the same. And that would mean different things, of course. We didn't have the same passions as Gabriel, but that was one thing. And then the second piece of that is just about the grieving process. And we laid some ground rules that day. And I said, listen, none of us knows exactly what this is going to feel like from day to day, hour to hour, week to week, and on. And all four of us are going to process this a little bit differently, but we're going to do this as a family, and we're going to do this openly. And so if we need to cry, if we need to cuss, if we need to laugh and, remember something fond of, his memory and a fun time or whatever, everything was okay. Nothing was off limits. And it wasn't dependent that everybody had to be feeling the same way. And so, and we haven't done any of this perfectly, of course. There's nothing spectacular about us. We're just normal human beings.
Right.
But we use those two things to constantly recalibrate and keep moving, forward. And Big Bold Brave, what happened was the next morning, a plane crash is already news. It's always news. And then the fact that he was only 17 just made it even bigger news. And so we had a couple of different news stations reach out to us. One was our local Fox affiliate, or NBC. And she got me by telephone, asked if we would be willing to do an interview that day. Now, this is the day after he died. And, my initial reaction was, and she was very kind. I want to just put that out. It sounds like it was just this rude, blunt, she was kind about it. But I was like, oh, hell no. I mean, we were a train wreck, emotionally. And so at the end of the call, though, keeping framed what I just told you guys about the conversation that I had with Joel and Liam and Amaryllis about how we were going to move forward, she said, I just need you to know, and I want you to think about it, but this is my assignment. I have to do a story tonight. If I do it without you, it's going to be a story about his death.
Right.
If you'll do it with me, and she was a believer too, which for me was very important. She says, I'll let you tell the story however you want to tell it. You can include your faith, and you can talk about any part of his life that you want. And so I didn't say yes. We hung up. My family was there. Obviously, we all had a discussion, and ultimately we decided to do the interview. And guys, the interview itself, other than I have the 3-minute segment on video, I can go back and watch it to be aware of what happened. That's all a blur.
Yeah.
But what came out of it was, at some point, I don't even remember saying it, I said he lived big, bold, and brave. And what struck me was, in the segment, we watched it that night, and it was beautifully done. We're to this day still very happy with the delicate way in which she handled the story and put it all together. But instead of saying or showing the part where I said it, her name was Katie. Katie at the very end said, Gabriel's parents want to encourage you to live like Gabriel, big, bold, and brave. And when I heard those words back to me, I knew there was something on it. I didn't know it was a book. I didn't know it was a personal development company. That was a couple of years before that would even come to fruition. But it was a family mantra immediately. It was just a phrase that we could occasionally, just bring back up whenever we were struggling, because we did struggle. It's been very difficult, but that's how Big Bold Brave was birthed, as a family mantra. And then eventually, after a couple of years, if I could just be candid with you guys, which I have been, I'm going to be even more candid here. COVID hit 3 months after Gabriel passed away.
Oh,
So we were processing both. And to not be insensitive to people who suffered during COVID, and especially a lot of people lost their life, and I'm very aware of that. And so my heart, my prayers, my love goes out to anyone who lost a loved one during that time for whatever reason. So I want to be sensitive to that. But one thing that infuriated me was all the fear that was being spewed out. And this is not a political statement for me. It's a matter of fact. I've talked to people on both sides of the political spectrum. And even though we may not agree on how the whole thing was managed, everybody agreed that fear went to this whole new level, unlike anything we've ever experienced before. And so that's ultimately, guys, why I decided to write the book when I did. I probably could have went another couple of years easy, if not for COVID, and not written the book yet. But
I'm going to interject because
please.
Fear is a controlling factor.
Yeah.
So if somebody, our parents put fear in us, our friends put fear of, the world puts fear in us, COVID put fear in everybody, your son lived fearlessly.
Yeah.
And to turn, I just got goosebumps. And just to turn that around, to understand that that's what we all have to do. We need to shut out the sound of everybody else and be fearless in ourselves.
Come on.
And as you say, big, bold, brave. I mean, that's a statement right there. That should just be a huge billboard.
Yes.
Because F everything else, because it gets into the fear of job seeking, fear of what somebody's thinking about you. I mean, I spent my whole life in fear of everybody and everything. Now I'm just like, whatever, because we've gone through so much. And what you're bringing to the table is to shout on the rooftops, stop it.
Yeah.
Here's a young boy who's just like, this is what I'm going to do. And now he's the angel, and he's overseeing your life, people he's touched, and even people that don't even know him through your book. Yeah. Yes, I skimmed your book because I'm going to read it in my long flight to Asia, and I'm sure I'm going to be bawling and laughing, and people are going to be like, what is wrong with this person? But I'm excited to read it because I know that fear. And I also know about saying, what am I fearful of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and again, I wanted to interject because unfortunately we only have a time, but I would love to bring you back on.
Yes.
Because I'd love to be able to share what you do for other companies, for people. I mean, you coach, correct? I mean, or mostly
be coach.
So, and I think it was Harvey. It has nothing to, religion is religion. That to me, that's just a corporation. It's your faith in whatever you believe in, God, Buddha, the Twinkies. I don't know, whatever brings happiness to you in your heart.
Yeah.
But I don't want people to think, oh, well, here's, their Bible thumping and all that. that stuff. We're not Bible thumpers. We're talking about our faith in believing. And when you have faith, you don't have fear anymore.
That's right.
Right.
That's
Over
out
fear.
the window.
Amen.
So we'll go off stage or whatever, but your story is so big
Yeah.
that it needs to continue to be shared, because I
Yeah.
feel that there's so many crevices in it that people are going to be like, oh my gosh, I need to do this. I need to do that to
Yeah.
understand. So what do you think, Kelly? And I'm sorry I interrupted, but
No,
that's what I
no.
do. My husband hates it, but it's what I do.
And that's why we work well together, Christy. There is a part in the book that, of course, talks about fear, obviously. And the way that you describe it, I thought was so great. And it's a small sentence, and I probably have it marked in my book, but I don't want to grab it and be distracted. But it's something about, this type of fear is created by the brain. It has nothing to do with human beings. And because the human, and this is the example you use, which I thought was so great and worthy of a share, is, when you're in the woods in the middle of the night with a flashlight and there is a mama bear and her cub,
Yeah.
that is fear. Physiological fear that comes in, fight, flight, or freeze. That is true fear. All the other fear mongering that happens around us, it feeds our brain, and we create all the scenarios that go along with it. I just thought that was super powerful and a good reminder, because people are truly afraid, and they're creating it and paralyzing themselves to move forward in any way. So I think this impacts, and I will say this is a blessing that came from COVID, is the book. And I think there were so many of us that during that time, because I certainly looked at it as, I went through a lot emotionally, personally, being laid off, being isolated by myself, depression we all had. And one of the things, that Christy and I find so important for so many, everybody's going through something.
That's
And
right.
if there's anything that we can possibly do to highlight something, to make someone feel like, gosh, I'm not alone. Someone else went through that. Someone else felt that way. And another big part of your book that touched me quite deeply is community. And that's part of what Christy and I are also trying to do, and that we do also on it. I do want to give a shout out to Donald Cohen and his Hour of Empower, that Christy and I are both on as well, because it is about community and supporting one another. Because when we feel supported, we feel safe, and we feel that superpower to do something that we thought we couldn't do, or something that we didn't even imagine that we could do. So I just think it's so wildly important in so many ways with community, and how that was also highlighted. And again, that's what we're trying to do here with everyone else. And I encourage anyone who is listening, if you know someone, or if there's something, please message us. That's what we're here for. We're not here live because we want to be private. We want this.
We dance with our skeletons. What can I say?
Yes, we do. So, all of that being said, Clint, I definitely want to have you back, certainly, because there's so much more conversation of.
And she had a crush on you, so
Well,
that.
Come on, you're a hot football player. That was in my hometown. I'm pretty sure he was on the CIF championship team. See?
Glory days.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
right.
a big football girl, loved football. My daddy taught me right. And I did end up being a cheerleader because I wanted to be closer to football. It had nothing to do with, like, I shouldn't say anything negative about it. They weren't my cup of tea, actually, some of them, but it was such a blast. And, having this reconnection come, and just Clint and I together, and Christy, of course, is part of this, because Christy and I are the ones that have brought the awesome journey here. And just seeing how this all played in together, it's like you couldn't have written it better, of how it all came to be. And to be able to share your story here has been, just an honor and a privilege. And I am just so grateful. So I know that Christy's probably going to beat us on the clock here soon, but what are your final thoughts here, Clint?
Yeah, well, I'd love to come back because there's a lot to talk about, and I want to tease everybody with this.
Ooh, a tease, football player. What can I say?
Well, there's two things. You guys said a lot. You guys said a lot of really great stuff just now, but to me, there was two things that are such a key factor in this. The first thing is we do have to be more self-aware. I call it having courageous conversations. First, you got to have a courageous conversation with yourself.
Amen.
And you got to become self-aware of what your fears are and why they paralyze you.
Yeah.
And then you need to make a courageous decision to change that.
Yeah.
So that's on us. And we can talk a lot more about that.
Yeah.
But you talk about community too, and community is also a huge part of it.
Yes.
Because and we've all known this for years, especially in the personal development phase. When you start to surround yourself, Jim Rohn famously said, "You are the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with." When you surround yourself with people who refuse to give in to fear, who are intent to make courageous decisions, or however you want to characterize that, you will begin to change the way you think, and then you'll begin to change the way you act, and then you're going to see your life dramatically shift.
Yes.
So those are two things that we're bringing to the table that are really going to help people, and I'm just grateful to be with you guys today and be able to just touch the tip of the iceberg on that.
Yes.
Well, it's such a huge conversation. I mean, it just, I think that the 3 of us, because we're not in our 20s anymore, and people always say to me, "Oh, you don't look 61." I'm like, because I don't remember my 20s. It's another story, but it's understanding why we did what we did as adults, young adults, teenagers, 13 years old. I can relate, going down those rabbit holes and then seeing the light, because there's always a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
It might be small, but there's always a light. And it's an amazing light because once you've gone through it, you can look back and go, wow, that was a freaking awesome journey.
Yes.
Come on. Nice little time. Well played.
Love it. Love it.
Okay. So it's 2:00 my time. It's 2:00 my time next week. That would be AM. And I will be gone the next 3 weeks. Kelly will be coming in out of Florida, hopefully figuring out how to use this.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing the replays. We've got some great guests coming in, taking my place with Kelly. And thank you, Clint. I really appreciate it, and I cannot wait to
Thank you.
the book.
Yes. And everyone, thank you again for joining us. And there is a part of the book, too, that I will say that we didn't talk about. And we will talk about later, and maybe it'll be next week, because next week, while Christy is away, Kelly will play, and I'm going to be having Kendra Maples, who is the owner of Culture Crush, and she will be co-hosting with me with our guest Blake Steinica, who is,
come on,
yes, who is a growth marketer at Clusive, which is an incredible organization that does online employment learning for the blind and the visually impaired. And he may also be a member of the USA blind hockey team. And yes, I did say blind hockey. So you don't want to miss that. It's going to be great. Christy and I are just truly blessed of how all of this is coming together. The conversations we've been able to have with people so far, the people that we have lined up, the conversations we have coming, the support that we've had. I mean, it's just been an awesome journey for the 2 of us, because we're learning, growing, and expanding. And that was another part of why we wanted to do this. So to that, I encourage everyone to go out and live like Gabriel. Big, bold, and brave.
Thank you, guys.